If you have been on your spiritual awakening journey for any amount of time, that I'm sure you have ran across the phrase, the ego death. Now, I want to question if there is such a thing as an ego death. Can it be obtained? And is it found in the scriptures? This is Ashley for FD 1111 Ministries, home of tarot, Bible, and alchemy. Before we can address the ego death and if it actually exists, let's first explore what the ego is. The ego is the identity, how we identify ourselves, almost like a business card for who we claim to be and who we feel that we fully represent, who we feel that we are. So the ego is formed by our 3D reality, everything that is outside of ourselves that gives us validation of who we are. From family to friendships, to our job, to the school that we went to the media that we entertain ourselves with, to the food that we eat. Everything that is a conglomeracy of who we are as an individual. This is also carried over to countries. So countries, they have flags, and those flags have symbolism. And those symbols are a representation of who they project themselves to be out into the world. Similarly to how we dress, how we speak, how we interact with one another. This is all evidence of the ego. So the ego is always looking and searching for ways of how to validate itself. This is called outside stimuli. The outside stimuli both builds and supports the ego. So when one goes through an ego death, they're destroying their identity. And when they destroy the identity, what is left? This is the question that I present to myself as well as to you guys. If we kill the ego, if we completely destroy the ego and allow it to die, what is left? What do we have to validate our existence? Besides a physical temple, which is still a form of identity and still a form of validation of the ego. Because even in the spiritual community, you still have to have some type of identification to fit inside of a category, so therefore others can relate to you. I would like to present the idea of ego transmutation, where we take our former ego, our former identity, and transmute it, building our own story from who we once identified ourselves as. This pairs well with my last video about Am I on the Right Path, where I go into the details of what is righteousness and are you on the right path, the right path being the intuitive side. So intuitively, we know who we have came here to be, the identity ego that we want to portray and project into the world. But through others' interference with our ego identity, that we formed a false identity, a false ego that needs to be transmuted. I do encourage you to check that video out. Is the ego death and the ego mentioned in the biblical text? First off, that the biblical text has been written in 3 different languages, Aramaic, Greek, and Hebrew, that was later translated into the English language by King James. So with that being said, that a lot of the words that we have today are not the exact same words. Romans 12:2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind. So all is mental. The mind controls every aspect of the body, every aspect of our being. So if you can transform your mind and have a ego identity rebirth through mental transmutation, that everything else will fall into place. Colossians 3:10, and it reads, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. So put on the new man. So the new man is the renewed man. It's connecting with the higher self, the new perspective, the new identity ego, which is renewed in knowledge, the knowledge that comes from the higher realms. 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore if anyone is in the Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone. The new is here. Going into a further study that I will do on the Patreon about the Christ, but the Christ represents the awakened mind, and that is the higher aspects, the higher faculties of ourself. When we take a higher perspective, a higher awakened standpoint, that we have regenerated ourselves, we have transmuted ourselves, and we are completely new. You ever seen someone that you haven't seen for a while and you start to talk to them and they're like, wow, you have changed completely since high school, since middle school, since just last week. That is because you are completely a new person when you change your identity, aka your ego, through the mental transmutation process. Ephesians 4:22 through 24. You were taught with regard to the former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, which is the lower desires, which is the carnal mind, the primitive mind. This is keeping one in the base chakra. To be made new in the attitudes of your mind and put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. So righteousness, once again, I went over that in a separate video, and holiness is being completely holy yourself, which is connected directly to your higher self. And so the subconscious directly communes with your higher self, and the higher self directly communes with the Holy Spirit. So when the subconscious mind and the conscious mind pair with that communication and aka communion, coming into agreement, merging into the one, the alchemical marriage, that you are completely whole. That's what holiness means, being completely whole. That your mental process works completely different. Mental transmutation. This leads me to my next question. When one transitions, aka death, does their ego live on? Now this can be a tricky question, because if one is wrapped up in the identity, if they no longer exist in this physical realm, is their ego indeed dead? I don't think that the ego dies even if a person has transitioned, because the ego is the identity. So if someone is still talking about what they gathered from your identity, if someone is still making reference to you, then your ego lives on. For example, Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa, anyone that has transitioned out of the physical body, that people still talk about them, people still make reference to them, people know them as a certain individual, so therefore their ego still lives on. If you have any other questions or comments you want to leave down below, you are interested in the deeper study that I'm going to post on Patreon, you can find that link down below. Ascended Bible Divine Guidance Cards, which I also mentioned one of the scriptures in this video. You can find the link for those down below. If you have not subscribed as of yet, you can do so by hitting the subscribe button, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you can receive notifications when I post new information here. I very much appreciate it, and I will talk to you guys in the next Ascended study.